The woman who raised me, who I called Mom for 32 years, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I never wanted you to find out this way." But here's the thing about DNA tests. I don't care about the lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. What I discovered didn't just change everything I thought I knew about my family. It shattered the very foundation of who I believed I was. My name is Sarah, I'm 32 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the most boring, predictable family story you could imagine. Mom, Dad, me, and my younger brother Jake. We lived in a small suburban house in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest scandal is usually someone getting divorced or having an affair that the whole town whispers about for exactly 3 weeks before moving on to the next drama. Growing up, I was always told I looked just like my dad. Same brown eyes, same stubborn chin, same way of tilting my head when I was thinking about something. Mom would laugh and say, "You're your father's daughter, no doubt about it," and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my mom. Moms don't lie about things like that, right? My parents met in their early 20s at a church social. Dad was this quiet, steady guy who worked construction. Mom was the outgoing one, who organized all the community events. They were that couple everyone looked up to. Married for 35 years, never seemed to fight, always presenting this united front. Dad would bring Mom flowers every Friday, and she'd have his favorite dinner ready every Sunday after church. It was like living in a Norman Rockwell painting, complete with the picket fence and the golden retriever named Buddy. Jake came along when I was 3, and if I thought I looked like Dad, Jake was practically his clone. Same sandy blonde hair, same blue eyes, same laugh that could fill up a room. People would see us together and immediately know we were family. "Those are definitely Tom's kids," they'd say, and Dad would beam with pride. I had what most people would call an idyllic childhood. Dad taught me how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball, how to change a tire. Mom was the one who helped with homework, braided my hair, and stayed up with me when I had nightmares. They came to every school play, every soccer game, every graduation. When I got accepted to college, they both cried. Happy tears, proud tears. But looking back now, there were always these little moments that didn't quite add up. It's like how Mom would get this strange look in her eyes when people commented on how much Jake and I resembled Dad, or how she'd quickly change the subject whenever anyone brought up baby pictures from my first year. She claimed she wasn't much of a photographer back then, that she was too busy with a newborn to think about documenting every moment like parents do today. There were also the medical forms. Every time I had to fill out family medical history, Mom would get vague. "Oh, nothing major runs in our family," she'd say. But when Jake broke his arm in high school, she suddenly remembered that Dad's side had weak bones. And when Jake developed asthma, she recalled that respiratory issues ran in Dad's family too. It was like she had selective memory that conveniently activated whenever Jake needed medical context. But when it came to me, everything was always normal or nothing to worry about. The strangest thing, though, was how different I was from the rest of them. It's not just physically. Though now that I really think about it, my brown eyes and dark hair did stand out in a family of blue-eyed blondes. But personality-wise, too, I was artistic, dramatic, emotional. I wanted to be an actress, then a writer, then a musician. I felt everything intensely and expressed it all loudly. Meanwhile, my family was practical, steady, even-tempered. They were the type of people who planned everything 6 months in advance and never deviated from the plan. "You must get your creative side from somewhere way back in the family tree," Mom would say whenever I'd put on impromptu performances in the living room or write elaborate stories about fantastical adventures. Dad would just smile and clap politely, but I could tell he didn't really understand this wild, imaginative child who seemed to have landed in their predictable world like an alien. In college, I studied theater and met other creative people who understood my intensity, my need to create and perform and feel everything at full volume. When I brought friends home, they'd always comment on how different I seemed from my family. "Are you adopted?" This became such a common joke that I started making it myself. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was switched at birth," I'd laugh, never imagining how close to the truth I actually was. After college, I moved to Chicago to try to make it as an actress. But like most aspiring actors, I ended up waiting tables and doing community theater. I was happy, though. I felt like I'd found my people, my tribe of fellow creative souls who understood why I needed to cry during movies, and write poetry at 2 a.m. and have deep philosophical discussions about the meaning of art. Mom and you. Dad would visit occasionally, and they were always supportive, always proud, but there was this underlying current of bewilderment. Not like they loved me fiercely, but couldn't quite figure out where I'd come from. Our little dreamer mom would call me with this mixture of pride and something else I couldn't quite identify, something that looked almost like sadness or maybe guilt. It was until I turned 30 and started thinking seriously about having kids of my own that I began to really question the gaps in my medical history. My boyfriend at the time, Marcus, was adopted, and he'd done extensive research to find his biological parents, partly for medical reasons. Watching him navigate that journey made me realize how much I didn't know about my own genetic background, even though I thought I knew exactly where I came from. That's when the questions started becoming harder to ignore. The first crack in my perfectly constructed family story happened during what should have been a routine Dr.S. appointment. I was 31, and Marcus and I had been talking about getting engaged. My gynecologist was updating my medical history, asking the standard questions about family health background. When she paused and looked at me with concern, "Sarah, you mentioned your father and brother both have a history of heart issues, but your blood work and genetic markers don't show any predisposition to cardiac problems. That's unusual. Are you sure about your family medical history?" I laughed it off. "Well, I mean, maybe I just got lucky and didn't inherit those genes." She gave me this look. You know, the one doctors give when they're retrying to decide whether to say something that might change your entire world? It's possible, but genetic markers for heart disease are usually pretty dominant, especially the type your father has. Have you ever considered genetic testing, just to be thorough? I left that appointment with a weird feeling in my stomach, like when you're walking downstairs and you miss a step. Everything felt slightly off balance, but I couldn't put my finger on why. A few weeks later, I was home for Mom's birthday dinner. Jake had brought his new girlfriend, and she was one of those people who gets really excited about family resemblances. She kept going on and on about how Jake and Dad could be twins, how they had the exact same mannerisms, even the same way of holding their fork. "And Sarah," she said, turning to me with bright, eager eyes, "you must look just like your mom did when she was younger." The table went quiet. Not completely silent, but that subtle shift where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their mashed potatoes. Mom gave this tight smile and said, "Oh, Sarah's always been unique. She gets her looks from, well, genetics are funny things." But Jake's girlfriend wasn't done. "Do you have any baby pictures? I love seeing how much people change from when they're little." That's when something really strange happened. Dad and Jake started talking at the same time about Jake's recent promotion at work, and Mom jumped up to get dessert even though we'd barely finished the main course. It was like they were all desperately trying to change the subject, and the harder they tried, the more obvious it became that something was wrong. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen while she was doing dishes. "Mom, what was that about? Why did everyone act so weird when she asked about baby pictures?" Mom's hands stilled in the soapy water. For a moment, she looked like she might say something, but then she just shook her head. "I don't know what you mean, honey. We were just excited about Jake's news." But I could see it in her eyes, that same look she'd gotten throughout my childhood whenever the topic of my early years came up. Like she was carrying some heavy secret that was getting harder and harder to hold. The breaking point came 3 months later, during a family gathering for my cousin's wedding. I was sitting with my aunts, Mom's sisters, when Aunt Linda had a few too many glasses of wine and started reminiscing about the old days. "Remember when Sarah was born?" she said to Mom, her words slightly slurred. "What a crazy time that was. Still can't believe you managed to keep everything so, Linda." Mom's voice was sharp, cutting. "That's enough." But Linda was on a roll. "I'm just saying, it took real strength to make the choices you made back then. And look how beautifully everything turned out." Sarah never needed to know about Linda. This time, Mom's voice was loud enough that several people turned to look. "We are not discussing this. Not here, not ever." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "No, about what? What are you talking about?" The two sisters stared at each other, Mom's face pale and Linda's flushed with embarrassment and wine. Finally, Linda muttered an apology and walked away, leaving me alone with Mom and 1,000 questions burning in my throat. "Mom, what was she talking about? What don't I need to know?" Nothing, Sarah. Your aunt had too much to drink. You know how she gets. But I could see the panic in her eyes, the way her hands were shaking as she smoothed down her dress. This wasn't about Linda's drinking. This was about me, about my birth, about some secret that my family had been keeping for 31 years. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every strange moment from my childhood. Every deflected question about my medical history. Every time someone commented on how different I was from the rest of the family. I thought about my doctor's confusion about my genetic markers, about the way my family had reacted to Jake's girlfriend's innocent questions about baby pictures. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to take a DNA test. Not one of those family tree ancestry tests that everyone was doing for fun. A real comprehensive genetic analysis. I told myself it was for medical reasons, for the future children Marcus and I might have. I needed to know my real genetic history, my actual predispositions and risks. But deep down, I think I already knew what I was really looking for. I was looking for the truth about who I was, about where I really came from, about why my own mother couldn't look me in the eye when I asked about the day I was born. I just had no idea how devastating that truth would be. Ordering the DNA test felt like I was cheating on my own family. I sat in my Chicago apartment for 3 weeks with the kit unopened on my kitchen counter, staring at it every morning while I drank my coffee, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid and ridiculous. "I'd just throw it away," I'd tell myself. You're creating problems where none exist. So what if Aunt Linda said something weird while she was drunk? So what if you don't look exactly like your family? Plenty of people don't look like their relatives. But then I do remember Mama's face when Linda started talking about my birth. The pure terror in her eyes, like someone was about to expose her deepest, darkest secret. And I'd remember all those years of vague answers about medical history. All those deflected questions about baby pictures. All those moments when I felt like a stranger in my own family. Marcus found me staring at the kit one evening after ID had a particularly rough day at my restaurant job. I'd been dealing with difficult customers and thinking about how I was 31 years old, still waiting tables, still trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. The DNA kit had become a symbol of all my uncertainty, sitting there like a Pandora's box that I was too scared to open. "Sarah, what is that?" he asked, setting down groceries and looking at the unopened package. I told him everything. The doctor's appointment, the weird family dinner, Aunt Linda's drunken, almost confession. As I talked, I could hear how crazy it all sounded. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, I finished. Maybe I'm looking for problems that don't exist. Marcus sat down across from me and was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You know, when I was trying to find my biological parents, my adoptive mom told me something that really stuck with me. She said that secrets have a way of poisoning families, even when they're kept with good intentions. The truth doesn't go away just because we ignore it. But what if the truth is worse than not knowing? What if it's not?" he countered. "What if it's actually better? What if whatever your family is hiding is something that would actually help you understand yourself better?" That night I called my best friend from college, Emma, who is now a therapist in California. I needed to talk to someone who was emotionally invested in my family's situation, but who knew me well enough to give me real advice. "Emma, hypothetically, if you suspected your parents were hiding something about your birth or your parentage, would you want to know?" She was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, is this hypothetical, or are we talking about you?" I told her everything. And when I was done, she asked me a question that cut straight to the heart of it all. "What are you more afraid of? Finding out something that changes your understanding of your family, or spending the rest of your life wondering?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Both terrify me." "Here's the thing," Emma said. "You're already living with the uncertainty. You've been carrying these questions for years. At least if you do the test, you'll know one way or the other. But what if it destroys my relationship with my parents? What if whatever they're hiding is something they had good reasons to keep secret? Then you'll deal with that when it happens. But Sarah, you can't make decisions for other people. You can't protect them from consequences they created by keeping secrets. You can only decide what you need to know to live your own life authentically." After I hung up with Emma, I sat with the DNA kit for another hour. I thought about all the times I felt like I didn't quite belong in my own family. I thought about the medical questions I couldn't answer, the family history that was full of gaps and inconsistencies. I thought about the children Marcus and I wanted to have someday, how I wanted to be able to give them complete, honest information about their genetic background. But mostly, I thought about that look in Mom's eyes. The fear, the guilt, the weight of whatever secret she'd been carrying all these years. I realized that I wasn't just curious about my own origins. I was worried about her. What kind of burden had she been carrying alone? What kind of truth was so terrible that it had to be hidden for 3 decades? Finally, I opened the kit. The instructions were simple. Spit in a tube, seal it, mail it back. Such a small action to potentially unravel an entire life story. As I read through the paperwork, I saw that the results would take 4 to 6 weeks to process. 6 weeks to find out if my entire understanding of who I was had been built on a lie. I filled out all the forms with shaking hands. Name Sarah Mitchell. Date of birth, March 15th, 1991. Father's name, Thomas Mitchell. Mother's name, Patricia Mitchell. Such basic information, but as I wrote it down, I found myself questioning each detail. Was March 15th really my birthday? Were Tom and Patricia Mitchell really my parents? The hardest part was the section asking what I hoped to learn from the test. They offered multiple choice options: medical history, ethnic background, potential relatives, paternity confirmation. I stared at that last option for a long time before checking it off. Paternity confirmation. Such clinical words for such a life-altering possibility. I walked to the post office that same evening before I could lose my nerve. As I dropped the package into the mail slot, I felt like I was crossing a point of no return. Whatever I learned in the next 6 weeks would change everything, and there would be no going back to the comfortable ignorance of before. The waiting began immediately. Every day felt like a week. Every phone call from my parents made me wonder if they somehow knew what I'd done. I found myself studying my face in mirrors, trying to see traces of Tom Mitchell in my features, looking for evidence that would prove my suspicions wrong. But deep down, I think I already knew what the results would say. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 7:23 a.m. I was getting ready for work, rushing around my apartment trying to find my name tag, when my phone chimed with a notification that stopped me cold. Your DNA results are ready. I stood in my bedroom, holding my phone with trembling hands, staring at that subject line like it was a death sentence. 6 weeks of waiting. 6 weeks of anxiety and sleepless nights and analyzing every conversation with my parents for hidden meanings. And now the moment of truth was literally at my fingertips. I called in sick to work. I couldn't handle the idea of opening those results and then having to spend 8 hours pretending to care about people. Lunch orders, while my entire world potentially crumbled around me. I made a pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The login process felt eternal. Password, security questions, terms and conditions. By the time I finally reached the dashboard, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. There were several categories of results: health predispositions, carrier status, ancestry composition, and DNA relatives. I clicked on ancestry composition first, thinking it would be the least emotionally charged. The pie chart that loaded made my stomach drop immediately. According to my DNA, I was 52% Irish, 31% Italian, 12% German, and 5% Scandinavian. That couldn't be right. My dad's family was German and English, and my mom's side was mostly Scottish with some French. There was no significant Irish or Italian heritage anywhere in our family tree, or at least not in the family tree I'd been told was mine. But it was the DNA relatives section that destroyed me completely. The first match showed a 50% DNA shared, a parent-child relationship. The name was listed as P. Mitchell, with a note that this person had chosen to share limited information. 50% match. That had to be one of my parents, right? But which one? I scrolled down to the next closest match. 25% DNA shared, indicating a half-sibling relationship. The profile belonged to someone named Jake Mitchell, my brother. So Jake was my half-brother, not my full brother. We shared one parent, but not both. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely scroll down to see the rest. There were several other matches in the 12 to 15% range. First cousins or half-aunts. Uncles, names I didn't recognize. Faces that looked nothing like the people I'd grown up calling family. And then I saw something that made my vision blur with tears. There was a 50% match I had missed. Another parent. The profile showed M. Romano, 67, Chicago, ill with a photo of a man I had never seen before in my life. Dark hair going gray, brown eyes just like mine, an artist's hands holding what looked like a paintbrush. His profile was public, and when I clicked on it, I found a treasure trove of information. Michael Romano, born in Chicago, 1956. Occupation, art teacher and weekend painter. Interests, theater, music, creative writing. Never married. No children listed. No children listed. I stared at his photo for 20 minutes, studying every detail of his face, looking for traces of myself. The eyes were definitely mine. The way he held his head, slightly tilted when he was concentrating on his painting. I did that too. Even his hands looked like mine, long-fingered and expressive. This man was my father, not Tom Mitchell, who had raised me and loved me and taught me to throw a baseball. As a stranger in Chicago, this artist who didn't even know I existed, was the person who had given me half my DNA, all my creativity, and my desperate need to make art. I don't remember making the decision to call him. I just found myself dialing the number listed on his profile, my whole body numb with shock. It rang 3 times before a man's voice answered. "Hello, is this Michael Romano?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell, I think. I think you might be my biological father." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he said, "Sarah." "You said your name is Sarah?" "Yes. And your mother, ... is her name Patricia?" "Patricia Martinez before she got married." The fact that he knew Mom's maiden name, a name I had never heard connected to her before this moment, confirmed everything. "Yes, Patricia Martinez. But how do you ... At." Oh my God, his voice broke. "Sarah, I've been looking for you for 32 years, and that's when I completely fell apart." I sobbed into the phone while this stranger, my father, told me a story that rewrote my entire history. He and Mom had dated in college. They were young, passionate, completely wrong for each other, but deeply in love. When Mom got pregnant, she panicked. She was only 20, from a conservative family, engaged to Tom Mitchell, who could give her stability and respectability. She told me she was going, too, that she couldn't keep the baby, Michael said, his voice thick with old grief. I begged her to reconsider, offered to marry her, told her we could make it work somehow. But she said her mind was made up. Then she disappeared. She changed schools, wouldn't return my calls. I never heard from her again. "But she did keep me," I whispered. "She kept you, and she married Tom, and she let him raise you as his own." I spent years trying to find her, to find out what happened. I've been registered on every DNA database, hoping that someday you might look for me. As he spoke, everything clicked into place. The way I was so different from the rest of my family. The artistic temperament that seemed to come from nowhere. The questions about medical history that Mom could never answer, because she didn't know Michael's family background any better than I did. I had found my biological father, but in doing so, I had discovered that my entire life had been built on a lie that my mother had been carefully maintaining for over 3 decades. I spent 3 days after that phone call in a state of complete emotional paralysis. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the weight of what I now knew. Michael, my biological father, had given me his phone number and asked if he could call me again soon. Part of me desperately wanted to talk to him more, to learn everything about this person who had unknowingly shaped half of who I was. But another part of me felt like I was betraying the man who had actually raised me by even considering a relationship with the stranger who had provided. My DNA Marcus found me on Thursday evening sitting on our couch staring at nothing, still wearing the same clothes I'd put on Tuesday morning. "Sarah, you have to talk to them," he said, sitting down next to me. "You have to confront your parents about this." "I can't," I whispered. "What am I supposed to say?" "Hey, Mom, I know you've been lying to me my entire life, and also I found my real dad that's going to destroy her. She destroyed herself when she chose to keep this secret for 32 years, Marcus said, and his words hit me like a slap. "Sarah, this isn't your fault. You didn't create this situation. You just uncovered it." But knowing he was right didn't make it any easier. I kept thinking about Dad Tom, the man who had raised me, and how devastated he was going to be when he found out that I knew the truth. Did he even know the truth? Had Mom lied to him too? Or had he been complicit in hiding my real parentage all these years? I finally drove home to Ohio on Saturday morning, telling my parents I wanted to have an early dinner with them. I didn't tell them why. I couldn't figure out how to even begin that conversation over the phone. When I walked into their house, everything looked exactly the same as it always had. Mom's collection of ceramic roosters on the kitchen. Windowsill Dad's reading glasses folded neatly on the coffee table, the family photos covering every available surface. But now those family photos felt like evidence of an elaborate deception. There I was at 5 years old, grinning toothlessly between Mom and Dad at some long-forgotten birthday party. There was our last Christmas, all four of us wearing matching red sweaters that Mom had insisted on buying. How many of those smiling family photos were built on a lie? Mom was in the kitchen making pot roast when I arrived, and Dad was in his chair watching a baseball game. Such a normal, domestic scene. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. Maybe I could just pretend I'd never taken the DNA test. Maybe I could go back to Chicago and never mention Michael Romano's existence. Maybe I could protect this peaceful family tableau from the chaos I was about to unleash. But then Mom looked at me with that same expression she'd worn my entire life. Loving, but guarded. Like she was constantly calculating what she could and couldn't say. And I realized I couldn't live with that anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that the gaps in my family history didn't matter. The secrets weren't slowly poisoning all of our relationships. Mom, Dad, I need to talk to both of you about something important. They settled into the living room, and I could see worry starting to creep across their faces. Are you okay? Mom asked. Is everything all right with Marcus? I took a DNA test, I said, deciding to just rip the bandage off. And I found out that Tom isn't my biological father. The change in the room was immediate and devastating. Dad's face went completely white, and he looked at Mom with an expression of confusion and dawning horror. Mom's hand flew to her throat, and I watched 32 years of carefully maintained composure crumble in real time. Sarah, she whispered. God, Sarah, I never wanted you to find out like this, and so you're not even going to try to deny it. The question came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was so hurt and angry that I couldn't modulate my tone. Dad was staring at Mom like he'd never seen her before. Patricia, what is she talking about? That's when I realized that Dad, the man who had raised me, who had loved me unconditionally for 32 years, had been as deceived as I had been. Tom, Mom said, tears starting to stream down her face. Should have told you. I should have told both of you years ago. I was young and scared, and I made choices that seemed right at the time. But are you telling me, Dad said, his voice dangerously quiet, that Sarah isn't my daughter? She is your daughter. Mom said desperately. You raised her. You loved her. You're her father in every way that matters, but not biologically. Dad's words weren't a question. No, Mom whispered. Not biologically.
Ow.
The silence that followed was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I watched my dad. The steady, reliable man who had been my hero my entire life process the fact that the child he de-raised and loved was ungenetically his. I watched my mom realize that her decades-old secret hadn't just been exposed, but that it was destroying her marriage in real time. Who is her biological father? Dad asked finally. Michael Romano. We dated in college before Tom and I got engaged. It was a mistake. Just one night. But then I found out I was pregnant and I didn't know what to do. Michael wanted me to leave Tom, wanted us to get married and raise the baby together. But I knew that would be a disaster. Tom, you were stable and kind and ready to be a father. Michael was this impractical artist who could barely take care of himself. So you lied to me, Dad said. You let me believe Sarah was my biological child for 32 years? Thought it was the right thing to do? Thought if I told you the truth, you'd leave me, and Sarah would grow up without a father. This way she had a stable home with two parents who loved her. But those two parents weren't her real parents. I exploded. One of them was a stranger, and the other one was keeping this massive secret. Do you have any idea what this feels like? Do you understand that I've spent my entire life wondering why I felt like I did and belong? And it turns out it's because I literally didn't belong. You did belong, Mom said desperately. You do belong. You're our daughter, Sarah. Biology doesn't change that. But it changes everything else, I said, and I could hear my voice breaking. It changes my medical history. It changes my genetic risks. It changes my entire understanding of who I am. And it means I have a biological father out there who spent 32 years wondering. What? happened to me. Dad looked up at me with hollow eyes. You found him. I talked to him. His name's Michael Romano, and he's been looking for me my entire life. That's when Dad got up and walked out of the room. I heard the front door slam, and then the sound of his truck starting up in the driveway. Mom and I sat there in the wreckage of our family, both crying, both realizing that there was no going back from this moment. The aftermath of that confrontation was like watching a slow-motion car accident that just kept going and going. Dad didn't come home that night, or the next night. He stayed at his brother's house while he tried to process 32 years of marriage built partially on a lie. Mom called me crying every day, begging me to understand that she'd only been trying to protect everyone. I was 20 years old, Sarah, she'd say through her tears. I was scared and pregnant, and I thought I was making the best choice for everyone involved. I thought Tom would be a better father than Michael, and I was right about that. Look how wonderfully you turned out. But that was the problem. I hadn't turned out wonderfully, at least not in the way she meant. I'd spent my entire adult life feeling displaced, feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere. All those years of wondering why I was so different from my family, why I felt things so intensely. Why? I was drawn to art and creativity in a way that seemed to mystify my parents. It all made sense now, but it also made me realize how much of my life had been spent trying to force myself into a mold that was never going to fit. Meanwhile, Michael and I started talking regularly on the phone. Those conversations were surreal and wonderful and heartbreaking all at the same time. Here was this man who understood my artistic temperament instinctively, who got excited when I told him about my writing attempts and my community theater work. When I mentioned that I'd always felt like I was too dramatic, too emotional for my family, he laughed and said, "You sound perfectly normal to me. You sound like an artist." "I've always felt guilty about being so intense," I told him during one of our conversations. Like there was something wrong with me for feeling everything so deeply. "There's nothing wrong with you," Michael said firmly. "It's that intensity, that emotional depth. That's where art comes from. That's a gift, not a defect." Hearing those words from someone who shared my DNA, who had given me those traits, felt like a revelation. For the first time in my life, the things that made me different didn't feel like flaws to be hidden or apologized for. But building a relationship with Michael also meant grappling with 32 years of lost time. He'd never gotten to see me take my first steps, never helped with homework, never attended a single school play or graduation. We were essentially strangers, trying to figure out how to love each other, and that process was messier and more complicated than either of us had expected. "I don't want to replace Tom," Michael told me during one of our conversations. "He raised you. I loved you. He's your father in all the ways that matter. I just want to know you now as an adult. I want to be part of your life going forward if you'll let me." That generosity, that understanding that love isn't a zero-sum game, helped me navigate the impossible situation of suddenly having two fathers. Because despite everything, Tom was still my dad. The DNA test results did unchange the fact that he'd have been the one to teach me to drive, to walk me through my first heartbreak, to cry at my college graduation. Biology had given me Michael's artistic soul, but nurture had given me Tom's steady strength and reliability. It took 3 months, but eventually Dad and I were able to have a real conversation about what had happened. We met at a diner halfway between his brother's house and Chicago, neutral territory where we could try to figure out how to be father and daughter in this new reality. "I need you to know," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with shaking hands, "that finding out about your biological father doesn't change how I feel about you. You're still my daughter. You'll always be my daughter." "I know," I said, and I meant it. "You're still my dad."